reuniting after a lot of years. But I've been watching, being as an older person, watching her journey through Facebook. But I've been watching her career and her journey in publishing and putting herself out there and speaking up against censorship and just like doing the good, hard work that really just proves how much she values writing and amplifying marginalized voices. And that is a little bit that leads into her topic today, which is why your voice matters, even and especially as censorship increases. And I think it's very timely if you all, as young writers, are thinking about getting yourself out there. It's an important topic. So she does have a couple copies of her book, Body Talk, for $10 down there if you'd like one, if you like what she's saying. And she also told me that the digital copies of all her books are available for $3 on various online platforms. With that, I want to get into her slideshow. So please, if you could, nice round of applause for Kelly Jensen.
Thank you so much. And I was joking that this was a whole presentation about Mrs. Carter. It is really not. But we have known each other for a long time, and so it was really an honor to have her ask me to come speak with you all. And I want to start with everybody closing their eyes for a second. I want to ask a couple questions, and I don't want you to feel like you can't answer them honestly. So the first question I have for you, and you can just raise your hand, is how aware are you of current censorship? Like, do you know about book bans happening right now? Okay, about half of you. Raise your hand if you know somebody or somebody's parents who have tried to ban a book from your school. You can, again, just raise your hand. Okay, still a few. And then the final question is, raise your hand if you agree with banning books. I do not see a single hand up in the air right now. So, oh, a couple. And we can talk about that during this presentation or after. And I'm gonna go ahead and ask you all to open your eyes again and we'll dive right into it. So first, just a little bit about me. My name is Kelly Jensen. I'm an editor at Book Riot. I have published several books. 3 of the most recent ones are Here We Are, Feminism for the Real World, Don't Call Me Crazy, 33 Voices Start the Conversation About Mental Health, and my most recent book is Body Talk, 37 Voices Explore a Radical Anatomy. I am a full-time editor at Book Riot, bookriot.com, and I'm a former teen and adult librarian. I went to undergrad for English and psychology. I went to grad school for librarianship, and I'm currently in graduate school for counseling as well. Since October 2021, over 4,000 different books have been banned in schools and public libraries across the United States. That's a huge number. These are unique titles. These are not 4,000 books total. These are 4,000 different titles. And one of the common phrases that's being used to talk about why book bans are okay is this idea of culture war. When you hear the word culture war, I want you to pause and think for a minute about what that really means. Whose culture is at war here? It's somebody who wants to keep you silent. And speaking of silence, the voices that are most likely to see their books banned are those by or about queer people, particularly trans people. Then, just underneath that, we're talking 1 percentage point here, any protagonists or authors of color, followed by books with sexual content, whatever that might mean, titles with issues of race or racism, so a book like The Hate U Give, titles with themes of rights and activism. Just pause with that for a second. The First Amendment gives us the right to speech. It gives us the right to the freedom of expression. It gives us the right to free assembly. And yet 10% of the books being challenged right now are on that very topic. Following that, we have biography, autobiography, or memoir. You can probably guess what the key themes in those books are that are creating bans, and then finally stories with religious minorities. Now these are key themes in the stories. A lot of these overlap and intersect. So a lot of the stories that are being banned are about queer Black people, or they're stories about trans people who may not be Christian or Catholic. So you'll see a lot of intersections in the types of books being pulled right now. Some of the words that our book banners are using and some of the reasons that they're putting behind their book bans include critical race theory. That's not a thing taught in any school unless you are in law school. What they mean by that is any history that talks about a story that is not the predominant culture, that is not the straight, white, heterosexual culture. The next topic that they love to use, the next phrase that they use, is comprehensive sexuality education, a purposeful mislabeling of what's going on. They use the word sexuality to consider, to make it sound as though you are being indoctrinated in classrooms over sexuality, when in fact, you are learning about puberty and what it is to navigate growing up. And then finally, the last big topic that seems to come up in the reasoning for why there are book bans is this idea of social-emotional learning. Now, if you ask the people who are banning books to define social-emotional learning, they can't. And when they start to try to explain what it is, the word that comes out is empathy. They don't want you reading books where you're going to empathize with another character. So a little bit about your generation. 50% of your generation are Black, Latina, Asian, or other non-white racial and ethnic identity. So half of your generation are people of color, or people of ethnic minority. 29% of your generation are children of immigrants or immigrants yourself. 21% self-identify as somewhere along the LGBTQ spectrum. And this statistic, I think, is maybe the one that's most chilling to me, particularly thinking about the sorts of books that are being banned and the reasoning behind those book bans, and that's only 45% of your generation will call themselves in good mental health. And that's in March 2021, so that's 2 years ago. What it looks like now is probably even lower. Some of the things that your generation is dealing with that even my generation, many moons ago, but not that many moons ago, our realities were less about inclusivity, about safety, and we're talking about physical safety here as well as mental and emotional safety, accessibility, education, cost of living, gender and sexuality, climate change, access to healthcare, technology, mental health, and of course, healing from trauma. You all just went through and are still going through the realities of a global pandemic. And that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. It's going to be a trauma that you have to work through in different ways. So I asked some authors who have been banned to share some insights with you all about why it's important for you to keep writing. You'll see them pop up here. And this is the first one. This is Megan McCafferty. She's a YA author, and she says, the greatest gift you have as a writer is your uniqueness. No one else experiences the world in exactly the same way you do. We need a variety of creative voices and points of view to help us better understand ourselves and each other. There's that empathy piece again. So why do we write? Everybody's got a personal reason why we write, but some of the big key phrases that come up again and again is to understand ourselves, to make meaning of the world, to inform, to connect, to share a message or experience, to entertain. All are valid, none is more important than the other. And you might have other reasons that you write, but these are kind of the big 6 reasons that we take pen to paper, we put our fingers to the keyboards. These are the reasons that we as creative people use our voices. And so there's no question that when there are book bans and there's censorship, it's trying to divide people. And the people who are banning books are doing so because they're losing power, they're losing control, and they're letting hate and fear be what guides them in their everyday. The people who are banning books are a small and vocal, very well-funded group. Some of them work as individuals, most of them work in groups that might be large, spreading across the nation, some might be more local. And I can say from my own work that there are a lot of local groups in the Chicagoland area, even in this area, that are doing this kind of work. They're fearful of losing control because when they can't decide what the curriculum is, when they can't decide what books you can check out from the library, they fear what you're going to learn. They fear that you're going to learn to think differently, that you're going to think a little bit more inclusively, that you are going to build that scary thing called empathy. And then finally, within hate and fear, they're worried that that listening and learning and engagement will teach you how to think. And there's a difference between teaching you what to think and teaching you how to think. And access to diverse literature helps you learn how to think. Book bans are really unpopular, and we saw that when I asked the third question. 87% of people are against book bans. That was as of February 2022. And then when we get a little bit more recent, September 2022, 75% of people disagree with book bans. That is a huge number. And then when given the opportunity to opt their students out of access to all the books in a school library, fewer than 1% of parents actually do it. So when you think back to that hate, that power, and that control, it's a very, very small number who want to do this, and it's a small number who are speaking on behalf of all of you. Kyle Lukoff writes, "If I don't write, it literally means I'm letting them win, and I couldn't live with myself if I did that. My writing has always been motivated by grudges and spite, and now I have an unlimited supply." So why are book bans so popular right now? Part of it is the changing demographics. We talked about what your generation looks like. Your generation is extremely diverse. Also, because it's easy to manipulate context. There are book banners out there who are creating databases of books they don't like, and they are stripping passages out of context. I'm going to show you that. Here's an example, The Hate You Give. How many people have read this book? Lots of you have read this book. So this particular group has decided that it should be restricted from minors. Why? Because it uses the word ass 37 times, it uses the word bitch 14 times, and you can see the rest of the profanity that they have literally gone page by page to count. And then they have gone through and marked the pages where they just don't like the passage. Now, The Hate You Give is probably 300 pages, and they identify how many pages here. If it's a 300-page book, and it has 90,000 words in it, they're concerned about roughly 250 words. And it's those 250 words that is driving them to take this book off shelves so you cannot read it. As anybody who writes knows, there's more to the story. That these book bans, that pulling this stuff out of context is doing just that you're removing the context of what a book is about and what a book should do. I love this comic from Maya Kababi, whose work has been among the most banned across the country, and they just want queer books on the shelves. Because as a queer teen, those books weren't available, and I can say as a teen growing up myself, these books were not as abundant as they are now. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of publishing being more representative of what your demographic looks like, but it's much better than it was 20, 30, 10, 5 years ago. And so that fear and that power of a small vocal minority is stepping in and saying, you guys, those of you sitting in these chairs, cannot have these books. And then my final little quote I wanted to end with here is from Robin Stevenson, who writes, "Kids and teens aren't the property of their parents, and they have the right to read and learn. Write the stories you want to write. If we censor ourselves, the bigots win. And so I just want to emphasize here that especially in times of censorship, especially in times when your voice is being told to be silent, that's when you talk louder. That's when you write more. That's when you stand up for the voices of those who are not like you, for the voices of those people sitting next to you, and for the voices of the people whose parents are showing up to schools and demanding that books get removed. You have the power to do that. And as young people, we are seeing you show up again and again and again, raising your voices on your behalf and on behalf of the person sitting next to you. When you write, as a writer, you can continue to change the story here. You can take back that power, you can take back that authority. And by continuing to write, you do just that. You put your voice out there, and you stand up for yourself and your neighbors. You come back to that little thing that scares these people among the most things that scare them, and that's empathy. Writing, any form, poetry, nonfiction, fiction, whatever you like to do is resisting. You have the opportunity to keep resisting through your work. You know what your realities are. We've already gone through them. And at the end of the day, you are the only person that can tell your story, and your story is important. So please, keep writing your stories, keep pushing back, keep speaking up, keep being the voice, because your voice matters, and the louder you speak, the quieter those who are trying to suppress your voice become. Thank you all.